Hello, and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. Make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast to get new episodes delivered to your feed. I'm your host, Amy Bryson, contributing lead editor with SME Media. And today we'll be covering a topic related to the massive workforce crisis facing manufacturing right now. And we're talking about the art and the science of attracting talent, and importantly, how to leverage a search firm to find that talent to fill the critical roles in manufacturing. And this is becoming increasingly complex with advanced manufacturing and technologies evolving traditional roles and creating both new job functions and just new job titles across the ecosystem. And we're lucky today to have our guest, Dick Schenkel, who is an excellent person to guide us through this big conversation, both from the perspective of how to work with a recruiting partner, and on the flip side, how to be a job candidate recruiters want to place. And Dick has written articles on these topics for advancedmanufacturing.org, and he is an industry veteran in the recruiting space. So I want to welcome Dick and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And before we dive into this topic, Dick, can you share with our listeners some background about your experience?
Sure. I began my career many years ago as a journalist, a newspaper and a magazine journalist, and definitely combined my love of writing with my love of reporting. Did that for several years. And at one point, I decided I wanted to try something new. So I literally answered an ad in the back of a magazine for a company that was looking for an executive recruiter. The company was the Howard Sloan Kohler Group based in New York, but a national search firm. Their specialty, their industry was media. So for the next 30 years, I worked for a firm that specialized in media, working with consumer B2B companies as well, and led or assisted searches and marketing and audience development and sales management and IT and IS management and searches for live and virtual event leaders. And I found, somewhat to my surprise, that my experience as a journalist dovetailed nicely into my experience as a recruiter, because I had learned how to ask the important questions, how to put the person I was interviewing at ease. And not only that, as a journalist, you have to think about why a story makes sense, why it adds up. Similarly, as a recruiter, it has to make sense to you. You have to understand why a candidate is interested in an opportunity, and eventually, if you place that person in a job, whether they are in the right job, whether they will stay in the right job. And so, to my surprise, and that career path was not anticipated, a lot of people really fall into the recruiter world. It worked out rather well. I left Kohler Search Partners about a year ago. I retired and am now keeping very busy doing several things, including writing for SME, doing volunteer work, enjoying lifelong education, and enjoying my life.
That's awesome. Well, I was sharing with you a little bit earlier, Dick, that we at SME Media, and both on advancedmanufacturing.org and in the pages of Manufacturing, Engineering, and Technology, we cover workforce development a lot. It's a very important topic for the industry. But this whole world of search firms and the recruiting aspect is not something that we've covered a lot, and it's quite fascinating, especially where the industry sits. So I'd like to start just with the basics, if we can. Just if you could talk to our audience a little bit about the ins and outs of a search firm and why they're valuable and why we should be paying attention to this, especially right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because what happens at a search firm really is a mystery to many people,
Mm-hmm.
both companies and candidates. So, the most basic way to describe the landscape is to say that search firms are divided into two types. One is a retained search firm. That's the type that I worked for many years. The other is a contingency search firm. The main difference being a retained search firm really uh, is much more thorough, delves much more deeply into the motivations of the candidate and the client, um, as opposed to a contingency search firm where the emphasis is really more on volume, on placing more people, often at a lower level, but not always, and in terms of what a client can expect, a contingency search firm is paid only if and when a candidate is placed. A retained search firm is guaranteed, for the most part, 25 to 33% of the candidate's anticipated earnings. And so, roughly 25 to 33% of the fee is paid upfront when the search starts. A second, third, 30 to 45 days into the search, and the final payment upon completion. That's sort of the basic landscape. And
Is that for the sorry to interrupt? Is that for the first year of their employment? That percentage rate is that?
yes, yeah, yes. In other words, just briefly, if a candidate is placed um, for where it's expected that their cash compensation is going to be $250,000 in uh, at the start of their employment, the fee will be anywhere from 60 to 80,000. And if for some reason the candidate should leave in less than 12 months, is the industry standard, that candidate will be replaced for free at the client company.
And the role of the recruiter, and it's fascinating. We talked about the need for this, or why is the need for this? In terms of the fee structure, it can be pretty fairly pricey, I would imagine. But justify how would a client justify that fee? I mean, with high level positions, I would imagine that companies could spin their wheels for months and months and months to try to find someone, let alone the right person. So how do you help clients navigate that kind of cost benefit analysis?
Right. They can and they do spin their wheels for many, many months. But the way we sell ourselves, the way we rationalize our service and our fee to clients is to say, listen, this is all we do. Let us take all the responsibilities, all the time, um, everything that either you don't have time for or you don't have the expertise or the contacts to do efficiently, dump it in our laps, let us take over the entire process, and that will certainly increase the chances of you hiring the person who should be in the job, as opposed to paying a somewhat smaller fee for a LinkedIn or a ZipRecruiter or a Recruiter.com or a Monster or any two or three of those above choice options, where it's a little like playing the lottery. You don't know what you're going to get, and at the end of the day, we are the experts when it comes to helping the candidate put their best foot forward, helping you put your best foot forward, and selling the opportunity to the candidate that you want, which is very underrated, and making sure that what should happen does happen. In the course of a given search, which on average lasts 3 months until an offer is accepted, there are countless ways um, in which a process can go sideways, so to speak. A candidate is says the wrong thing in the first interview in terms of the compensation they're looking for, or they say the right thing but somehow the client misconstrues it, or uh, the candidate is very interested going into the first conversation, but maybe the client is having a bad day and the candidate and the interview's been slated for 45 minutes. Something comes up. The client only has 30 minutes. It leaves a bad taste in the candidate's mouth when it's really no one's fault. But we have to step in and smooth things over. You're a strong candidate. Something happened, which was unavoidable, and keeping things positive. There are just a lot of ways in which a search can go south and mistakes can be made, countless ways. And so, our job is to take care of all the details, look at all the nuances, because Tesla or Apple or whoever, you don't have the time to, maybe not the patience. And this is all we do. So we can take care of all the details and make sure there will be a resolution that will make everyone happy.
Why do you think companies, especially larger enterprise companies, when they're struggling with recruiting, why do you think they wait or hesitate to work with a search firm? Do you think they know what they're doing and it's a candidate problem, like a shortage of candidates? Or do you think they simply don't have the process that it takes to even look at maybe passive candidates, for example, who might be the right fit?
I think with a lot of large companies, they operate under the assumption that they have a strong brand. There are always going to be many strong candidates with the right backgrounds available, which may or may not be the case. And as well, they don't appreciate, maybe because they haven't had this experience, they don't appreciate the nuances, the way things can go south, certainly. And that, a lot of times a recruiter needs to, frankly, coach, consult, be a social worker, a psychologist, and a babysitter for both the client and the candidate. So I think the reason, and so, to sum it up, I think a lot of times clients, because they haven't had this bad experience, are a little bit naive about all the pitfalls that can and often do come up during the process. And it can be a psychological barrier to psychological hurdle to clear when you've never paid a search firm before. And we, in my many years, had many experiences where we would pitch a new client with a specific position they were looking for, and we wouldn't hear back from them for a couple months. And we found out that there was nothing that we really said that was wrong or objectionable, but they just could not get over the idea of paying a search firm a good amount of money, not to mention a good amount of money before we've done almost any work. But again, and so maybe they'll use a contingency search firm, not fully understanding that we are going to be their consultants, their partners. We're not just a resume provider to them. That's what a contingency search firm does, not a retained search firm. Finally, another advantage that a retained search firm will offer a client making a crucial hire, and this is something that they really will seldom, if ever, get from a contingency firm, and certainly never get from a Monster or of ZipRecruiter.com, is the ability for a firm to perform sub rosa or hidden reference checking. In other words, pretty much any candidate can give a recruiter 3 references who will say great things about them. What a retained search firm will do is they will leverage the relationships they have with people that they've known for years and find people who worked with the candidate 5 years ago or 3 years ago and ask them, well, why did the candidate really leave the firm? And how are they thought of within your culture and within your company? And how did they perform when things didn't really go according to plan? Could they keep their cool? And just regardless of how that question is answered, what would you consider to be a weakness of the candidate? And we found that to be very, very valuable information. And 9 times out of 10, between the formal reference checking and the hidden reference checking, we would find certain negatives, areas for development for the candidate. And that's always valuable information going forward for the client.
Right. And from a candidate perspective, you know, why work with a search firm, since things like I would, from my perspective, I see people on LinkedIn all the time complaining about trying to use LinkedIn to find a job, or not even getting a response, or getting a like automated response. And there's so much frustration for people, very qualified people, trying to vie for what seems like very few jobs. That seems to be an engine of frustration for many people. And that's just one of the platforms out there that people kind of hang their hat on. Talk to me from your perspective what that looks like, and how that can be improved from a candidate experience.
Sure. Well, similar to what a search firm like ours offers clients, hiring companies, similarly, we will offer candidates, a partnership and the beginning of a long relationship. So it's a totally different relationship and process than if the candidate went through LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter or some of the others. So in short, we look for a candidate who is going to deal with us almost the way they would deal with a company that they want to go to work for. We are making instant judgments from the time we first speak to or look at a candidate about, frankly, will they make us look good to the client? Are they professional? Have they done their homework and done just a little preparation before their first conversation with me? Who are they? Does it make sense for them to be interested in this position, given the cover note that they just wrote, who said they're looking for something else? So we do a deep dive into their motivations, which is not to say that they can't work through us and also work through LinkedIn and some of the other options. But the reason why they might want to work for us is we are going to coach them and be very, very hands-on as they go through a search process, whether they get the offer or not. And even if they don't get the offer, there's a very good chance they've made 2 new excellent relationships, one with the recruiter and the second with the client who didn't end up offering them the job, but who knows, maybe in 6 weeks there'll be another job that they're right for, and they're already a step ahead. They've already made the positive impression.
Yeah, that's a great point, because what the frustration that I hear, even with, colleagues and former colleagues and friends, is they can't even get a foot in the door to have the first conversation. And it's so much about relationships and tending to those relationships. I wanted to pivot a little bit, talking about the candidate experience. I imagine that conversation has always been uncomfortable, I think, historically, about conversation about compensation, and, how to, from a candidate perspective, whether you're looking to grow your career, or even make a lateral move, or even change careers, it's got to be a difficult thing for them to navigate. How do you help them, navigate that compensation conversation?
Yeah, it's tricky, no question about it. So normally, especially when dealing with a new candidate, 9 times out of 10, a first meaningful conversation is a 15-minute phone conversation. Okay, so kind of going through their background, why they went from job A to job B, sort of the when and the why they want to make a change now, what's kind of falling short from in terms of their current role, and then their compensation. And so a lot of times, even I think in this first conversation, candidates really have a tough time figuring out, what do I tell the recruiter? I don't want to undervalue myself, but I don't want to price myself out of a job that I really want. So my response to that is to be honest. There's nothing wrong with saying to the recruiter um, that I'm looking for, just picking numbers out of thin air, a base of 150, a bonus of another one third. That's what I would like, but for a great job, I would go a little bit lower. Um, and so, and also what I'd really like, I'm looking for 150 plus another third, but what I'd really like is X. So kind of lay it all out there as opposed to just giving me hard and fast numbers. And that way, if we present the candidate for the position and we're speaking to the client about that candidate, we know how to couch that information to them, how to position that information to them so that they are not, so that they remain an active candidate if they should. So I guess to sum it up, we'd like the candidate to be completely honest with us. And another sort of very relevant point on all that is in most cases, we will ask a candidate what they're looking for in terms of compensation because legally we cannot ask them what they've been earning. So this is a little tricky, and the law is changing constantly. But the last time I looked, a search firm or a hiring company cannot ask a candidate what they're currently earning or what they earned 2 or 3 jobs ago if either the candidate lives in certain pro-labor jurisdictions or the company is in certain pro-labor jurisdictions, or the search firm or recruiter is not. So, for instance, if you live in Philadelphia or the job's in Philadelphia, you cannot be asked what you're earning. Other parts of Pennsylvania, you can. The entire state of California, you cannot be asked that. So for the most part, what you might call pro-labor states, cities, that question cannot be asked. But that's a constantly evolving situation. And even with that, employment law is kind of hazy in a lot of ways. And so that's just something that everyone should be aware of.
Yeah, I think those are some of the intricacies that make it complex. And I would imagine, too, I hear this a lot from people about how they feel like they're not qualified for something, or they might be less qualified. They feel intimidated that maybe they wouldn't stack up against the people that they would be competing with. From your experience, is it possible or does it happen that a candidate who maybe appears less qualified than someone else can actually get the job? They are actually the right fit for the job.
It does happen. It doesn't happen frequently, or it doesn't happen most of the time, but it does happen for various reasons. And I'm glad you bring that up because it allows me to make the point that culture is very important. So the person with the best resume or the most appropriate resume for a position often doesn't get the job because the person who is concerned they're underqualified is just an outstanding interviewee. They sell themselves. They ask intelligent questions that show that they really prepared for the interview. And so that happens very often, whereas the person who is the obvious choice, they didn't prepare, or they come across as a little cocky, or they come across as a little lacking in confidence, or none of the above, but they just wouldn't fit in the company's culture. So that's almost an entirely other podcast, how important culture is and who gets the job and who should want the job and who succeeds in a job.
I think that's it. It is. We could talk, Dick, we could have several podcasts on this topic, just breaking it apart. I think, too, we hear a lot and we see a lot of surveys and studies done that, especially with the younger generation of talent that's moving into manufacturing, that is some of these roles are more focused on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and technology focused AI, all of the things, right? And digitalization of the factory floor and into upper management. They want to work for a company that A is not just a job. They want to have a career and they want to work with a company that does purposeful things. They have a culture that is important. They want to align themselves with a company that cares about what they're doing, is making an impact societally. And sometimes companies, you can tell me from your perspective, companies overlook that as an important piece to present if they want to attract the best talent. Talk to me about how that is changing, if it is changing, or how that is playing out right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting subject because I would argue that in my first few years as a recruiter, I wasn't hearing as much from candidates about I want to be able to connect with I want to be able to connect with the mission of the company or the culture of the company. That definitely has been a change over the years. And I would even say that it's really changed from even 10 years ago. So no question about it. Um, and not only people early in their careers, with less than 8 years experience, this comes as well from people who are more experienced, who are a director and they're going for a VP or a department head position. But certainly the ability to not only enjoy the culture and enjoy and connect with the people they're working for, but believe in the product and its mission is more important than ever before. And conversely, uh, I would say companies, this varies quite a bit, but companies usually are looking for people who are ready to drink the Kool-Aid, uh, in part for the right reasons that you would hope, and in part because those people often um, are uh, are ready to pitch in and help where it's not part of the job description. If someone is out because of illness or maternity leave, someone, I hate the cliche, who's really a team player. So certainly we see it on the candidate's part and on the client's part as well. I think there's been a change there.
Okay. Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation evolution over the past few years, from my perspective. Let's talk a little bit about the specific role of the recruiter and if it's ever a good idea for the client or the candidate to go around the recruiter at any point in the process.
Certainly, uh, when it comes to the client, I would say it's okay to go around the recruiter if uh, if we're at the offer stage and it's getting difficult and it could go either way, and uh, and really the client wants to hire the candidate, but the candidate for whatever reason is not 100% sold on the opportunity. In that case, a client picking up the phone or sending an email saying, "Hey, Amy, just thought I'd touch base with you. It's been a week and a half. Um, we think you could be a great fit here. Let me know if you have any questions." There's no one who can sell an opportunity like the client company. It's our job as recruiters to always sell the opportunity, but at the end of the day, no one sells it better than the client. So taking that proactive action can really seal the deal. And so that certainly is a time. Now, we would hope that the client, before they would make that call, would say, "Hey, Dick, what do you think about the idea?" Conversely, the candidate going around, working directly with the client. And certainly, let me say, the candidate should deal with the client and always thank them directly right after each interview. Okay, and not just a pro forma letter, but here's why I'm interested. Here's exactly why I'm interested, and here's what I could bring to the job that no one else can. So that would be a case of directly dealing with with the client. But from time to time, unfortunately, despite our instructions, um, if we if a candidate's had two interviews with the client, and for various reasons things slow down in the process, the candidate hasn't heard from us, hasn't heard from the client, and they want to know what's going on, they will send an email or not pick up a phone, but send an email to the client and say, what's going on? That's a no-no. And the client could think, why are they contacting me directly? Don't they know that things go through the recruiter? Or why do they not know that? That's how they've been behaving up until now. So, really with the client or the candidate, Amy, it's okay now and then to go around us, but bounce that idea off us first, or just our stock and trade is information from the client and the candidate. Let us know what you're doing or what you're thinking.
Let's talk about some other things about what not to do, the kind of rules of engagement when working with a recruiter. Like, what's a way to get on the bad side of a recruiter, and also what works really well? Like, what are best practices?
Best practices, I would say, are being available. That's any recruiter who is, doing his or her job is a very busy person. So, the last thing we want to do is have trouble reaching a candidate. Most times we need an answer very quickly from them. So, certainly to be available. So that's very important. I think it's easier almost to focus on the things you shouldn't do than things you should do, because by saying the things you shouldn't do, you'll understand the things you should do. The things you shouldn't do is surprise us with information out of the blue. So, for instance, if we're down to searches progressing very well, the client has two candidates they're looking at, and one is a candidate who then tells us, my visa expires in 3 months, and that could be a problem renewing it. That's something that we should have told the client when we originally presented the candidate 2 months earlier. Or let's say the candidate's in Detroit, but the job requires them to move to Kansas City. And so, again, two finalist candidates, and one of them says, I've been talking to my partner or my husband or my wife, and I really don't think we can relocate. That's kind of the worst call that we can get, because it's partly our fault. What we normally do is we just pest that. We are pests with that candidate from the start about, are you sure you can relocate? Have you had that conversation at home? Have you ever visited Kansas City? You're looking at the cost of living. And how would you decide? Or play devil's advocate. Why the heck would you want to relocate in the first place where you can get a great job in the market where you're living? So the answer is a no-no is surprising us with information we should have had 2 months earlier. And last point on that is, it's okay in the end if you get the offer to increase the compensation you're asking for by a little. It's almost expected that you will when it comes to a negotiation, but not a lot. So if at the start of the search, someone has told me they're looking for a base of 150 or higher and a bonus of 25%, and 3 months later we're at the offer stage, great news, Amy. On behalf of so-and-so, I'd like to offer you so-and-so job. And then they say, well, I was really looking for, and they changed their ask. I should have known that much earlier. And sometimes, frankly, that's the recruiter's fault for not staying on top of that, but a lot of times it isn't. So the answer to your question is, things not to do is surprise a recruiter. And so the inverse of that, things to do, is keep the recruiter informed on all the important aspects, as opposed to, in addition to, how many other opportunities they're looking at, and whether our job, the job we're talking about, is your top choice or your third choice out of six. So again, it all comes down to communication and providing me with information.
Yeah, I think that transparency, I mean, it reducing the variables for miscommunication, and it only benefits all parties involved. So,
Yeah, transparency is a great word. It absolutely is.
what else is important for our listeners to know, especially from the companies who may be struggling right now with going it on their own to try to address this skills gap with the sheer numbers of people retiring? As I mentioned earlier, these new roles that are maybe more technology driven that they've never really had to hire for, make a concerted effort. We see more titles of people, the chief talent officer, maybe new in role, who are kind of going it on their own. What advice would you give them if they haven't considered trying to find the right search firm partner? What advice would you give them to get started on that journey?
When it comes to choosing a search firm, and something that a lot of clients should do is if you're going to use my firm, do your reference checking, check us out, find out what people are saying about us. But for the most part, there are two approaches once we start the search. Um, and one is to hire a retained search firm that specializes in your industry, automotive, uh, electronics, uh, technology, uh, things like that. The other is sort of a more horizontal approach. Someone who has the right skill set and has the right functional expertise, but might not be in your industry. So could Tesla, in other words, someone in the aviation industry, hire someone with transferable skills out of another manufacturing industry? And every situation is different. I can't say you should always be open to looking for someone with the transferable skills, but that certainly is a way to increase the talent pool, the candidate pool, and also again, it comes down to culture. And if there's a bit of a learning curve, sometimes you have that luxury, sometimes you don't. Consider that and looking at someone's resume and say, huh, well, they went from the aviation industry to the technology industry to the healthcare industry, as the case may be. So think expansively, think creatively when you can, because there's always going to be a lot of talent out there.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really great conversation, Dick. I want to thank you for joining us today to kind of scratch the surface on this huge topic, and we'd love to have you back to keep the conversation going. And I want to encourage our listeners to make sure they go on advancedmanufacturing.org and check out the articles that Dick has written. The first one is how to choose the right recruiting partner. The second one is, on the flip side, how to be the job candidate recruiters want to place. And there's a third article coming soon that's focused on how to plan your career trajectory. So those are definitely worth checking out. Anything you wanted to add, Dick, before we wrap things up?
I would just say that the way sort of hiring is happening these days, and you sort of mentioned this earlier, things are becoming more automated and everything is online. And if your resume has the right keywords, you might get a response or a first interview. So the very large search firms are operating that way more than ever before. The very, very small search firms often don't have the resources or, frankly, the people to help you. So when possible, when it makes sense, to contact a mid-sized search firm and doing whatever you can to get on the phone with the recruiter for 10 or 15 minutes, I guess, is writing a convincing cover note with a subject line which does not read results-oriented professional. Anything you can do to break through, to have a conversation the way we're having one now is strongly recommended.
Great advice. Well, thanks again, Dick. I want to thank you for your time today. And again, look forward to continuing this conversation. And I also wanted to thank our listeners for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast to get new episodes delivered in your feed. And also stay up to date about what's happening in manufacturing and check out Dick's articles by visiting us at advancedmanufacturing.org. Take care, everybody.